Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. You'd think the near assassination of Republican Congressman Steve Scalise by a Democratic activist last week would have set off some soul-searching on the left about the growing strain of violent extremism in its midst. If you fantasize about hurting people long enough, somebody's going to get hurt, and now somebody has. But no. In fact, the opposite has happened. Throughout the progressive world, in politics, in entertainment, on MSNBC, in higher education, talk of violence has, if anything, grown louder since those shootings. Here's the latest. It comes from Nebraska. Phil Montag, a longtime liberal activist and official with the state's Democratic Party, caught on tape applauding the shooting of Steve Scalise.
I hate this mother. Yeah. I'm glad he got shot.
We've laid in
I'm glad he got shot.
Dude.
I'm not going to say that in public.
Well, then what are you saying it to us for?
Say something.
What are you telling us for?
I wish he was dead.
I'm glad he got shot. No subtlety there. Well, at Trinity College in Connecticut, Professor of Racism Studies Johnny Williams agreed with that. He wrote this on social media after the shootings, quote, "Let them effing die." Williams wasn't fired from his post, far from it. His fellow Trinity faculty issued a fawning letter of support for him today. One colleague compared him to Salman Rushdie, persecuted by religious extremists. In this case, of course, Christians, not Islamists. A Change.org petition supporting Williams has drawn nearly 2,000 signatures as of tonight, and it's growing. Professor Let Them Effing Die is fast becoming a folk hero on the left. Meanwhile, fading actor Johnny Depp says he's excited about the possibility of a modern-day John Wilkes Booth stepping forward to murder the president.
This is the last time an actor assassinated a president.
Well, on Twitter, Marcella Arguello, she's a writer for Bill Nye's new Netflix show, had this to say about the Scalise shooting, quote, "If a few old-ass conservative white men have to die in order to get the gun control issue discussed, then I'm willing to take that risk." As of tonight, she's apparently still got her job. And extremism isn't just online. Having just watched partisanship ending in gunfire, you'd think lawmakers might try to lower the temperature a little bit. Not Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Here she is accusing her Republican colleagues of deliberately plotting to kill Americans for money.
These cuts are blood money. People will die. Let's be very clear. Senate Republicans are paying for tax cuts for the wealthy with American lives.
Okay, so you disagree with me on a piece of legislation, therefore you're a murderer. This is how things fall apart, when you no longer see political differences as legitimate, but instead as moral crimes. When you begin to believe your opponents are unworthy of life itself. When you start to make excuses for violence. That is all happening now. What do you think happens next? America's worth living in because we have a stable democratic order. We use debate and elections to resolve political disputes, not violence. And it's all worked for hundreds of years. But the system, don't forget this, is fragile. It will break unless our leaders commit to preserving it. Democracy may or may not die in darkness. It definitely will die in a hail of bullets. Tammy Bruce is a radio talk show host and a keen observer of what's going on in this country. She joins us now. Tammy, where's this going?
You know, historically, unfortunately, we know where it's going. This is predictable and predicted. Historically, wherever the left has been in power, and either it's to get power or if someone tries to move them out of power, the movement is to do violence. It's a dynamic where they realize that in order to have the cultural dynamic continue, the only way to maintain power is to silence those who are against them or those who do not conform, and of course that takes form of violence. In the 20th century, of course, just 3 countries, Soviet Union, Communist China, and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Right. Estimates are up to about 70 million people killed simply in order to maintain power. So this is what we have to be aware of. While our system is genius and brilliant, it's the leftist ideology that is new, and that our system in a lot of ways also allows to effectively breed in a way. And if we don't decide to take steps to condemn it, and as you've said in your opening, Tucker, whether it's Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton put out a tweet today saying that the Republican Party is the death party. After an attempted assassination of 22 GOP leaders at that baseball field, even Barack Obama, who's never at a loss for words, has said nothing publicly to condemn it or to tell people to step back. This is my worry, that the silence is also in a certain way could be interpreted as acquiescence and in some ways encouragement.
Well, see, that's what shocks me. I mean, I don't think any political movement ought to be held liable for the lunacy of its fringes. I mean, there are lunatics on all sides, for sure, and I've met some of them. But I do think that the people in charge, in power, in authority, have a moral responsibility to set the limits of behavior and to say, you know, that's totally wrong. You're not allowed to do that. Violence is outside the pale. They're not doing that. Where's the New York Times editorial denouncing this kind of stuff?
Right. See, this is it. And even if, let's say you had taken, Tucker, a week off, the week that the shooting happened in Arlington, and you unplugged and you weren't connected, just in returning 1 week later, with looking at the headlines online or otherwise, you never would have even have known that it occurred. And we're not going to be able to stop this unless we're willing to admit that it's happening, admit what the core sources of this. And remember, it's also, we've been looking at masked violent individuals trying to interrupt the inaugural on our campuses, the Occupy movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. It's changed from trying to engage everyone as a whole to the suggestion that this disruption is appropriate, that violence, arson is the way to go. And even then, not only were there not condemnations of it, but the left funded it and held it effectively to some degree as heroism. And that also, for Americans and everyone around the world, we're now awash in violence because of terrorism. We see it all over the world. It inures people to it, and that's another dynamic that's affecting our young people here, that, oh, this is normal. Well, someone's got to start saying that it's not.
I think that's a really smart point. Wasn't this inevitable, though, the minute the people in charge began to use terms like resistance or started to say things like don't legitimize the president? Because what they're really saying is it's not worth having a conversation. It's not worth debating. Talking isn't enough.
Right.
Doesn't that set the stage for violence once you say that?
Well, it does. My first book, actually now 17 years ago, talked about groupthink. And that's when you start to believe that you have sole possession of the truth. And that everyone else, if you've got sole possession of the truth, obviously no one else does. And that makes them, well, not only not as good as you, but not even worthy. And when you start to cast individuals as less than human, as people who are actually out to get you,
that's right,
there's really only one answer to how you react to that. And it's shocking, after the Arlington attempted assassinations, the fact that the rhetoric has not really shifted is the shocking point. And people on both sides of the aisle, certainly Democrats, good liberals out there, need to start demanding from their heroes of Sanders and Warren and Hillary to do more than a single statement, but to really stay with it and to encourage people to step back from this.
That's exactly right, because as you said at the outset, we can see exactly where this is going.
Yeah.
Tammy Bruce, thanks. That was wise.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, a bipartisan group of senators is now investigating whether or not the previous Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, may have deliberately slowed down the FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email server. Joining us now is Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge with the latest on that.
Tucker, the senators are investigating whether Lynch tried to block the FBI case. The chairman and ranking member writing in this letter they want relevant documents and answers from Lynch about media reports that she would not allow the FBI case into Clinton's mishandling of classified information go too far, and whether those reported assurances were shared with then DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz. During his congressional testimony June 8th, the fired FBI Director James Comey said he went public about the Clinton email case last summer because he lost confidence in Lynch, and in cryptic testimony appeared to reference a vital record.
There were other things that contributed to that. One significant item I know the committee's been briefed on. There's been some public accounts of it which are nonsense, but I understand the committee's been briefed on the classified facts.
Based on our reporting, in July of 2016, Lynch declined to answer questions about the Clinton email case more than 70 times when she went to Congress. Tucker?
Catherine Herridge, thanks a lot for that. John Daniel Davidson is a senior correspondent over at The Federalist, and he joins us now. John, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. So it seems like there is evidence, and we should just stress again, the letter that Catherine was referring to comes from a bipartisan assortment of lawmakers. They seem to have reached a conclusion that Loretta Lynch may have attempted to squelch, or there's evidence she attempted to squelch the investigation into Hillary. Do you think that's a fair conclusion?
Well, yeah, and the main reason I think it's a fair conclusion is because of what James Comey himself said before the Senate Intelligence Committee earlier this month. You know, one of the most remarkable things about his testimony was the part where he talked about how Loretta Lynch told him not to refer to the Clinton email investigation as an investigation, and instead told him to call it a matter. And even more remarkable, he challenged her and said, "Why would I do that?" And she said, "You know, just do it." And then he did it. You know, he complied with her and called it a matter when clearly it was a criminal investigation. So between that and Loretta Lynch meeting with Bill Clinton on the tarmac in Phoenix, you know, this is sort of just adding one more thing to a laundry list of signs that Loretta Lynch was trying to squelch the investigation.
Well, here's another. Okay, so the FBI, this comes from that bipartisan letter for Republicans and Democrats. So it's Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Grassley, Lindsey Graham, Sheldon Whitehouse. And it says that the FBI reported to have obtained an email or memo, and I'm quoting now, written by a Democratic operative who expressed confidence that Attorney General Lynch would keep the Clinton investigation from going too far. Now, that's not proof, but it's certainly emitting a strong odor. When is the former Attorney General going to be testifying before the Congress so we can get answers to whether or not this happened?
Well, I think that's exactly what we need. You know, the funny thing about these investigations is you don't know which direction they're going to go once they start. And in this case, I think, you know, there are real questions about, you know, what did Loretta Lynch do? What were the conversations that were held behind closed doors? You know, and we also have, you know, reports or testimony from Jay Johnson, the former director of Department of Homeland Security, saying the Obama administration didn't want to say anything about the Russia probe because they didn't want to seem like they were politicizing the facts. Well, look, the Obama administration politicized everything. I mean, Obama was literally campaigning for Hillary while all this was going on. The only reason they didn't want to talk about this stuff is because they thought it would hurt Hillary or help Trump. So the whole thing has been politicized from the beginning.
It doesn't really make sense, and this is one of the many ways the press has fallen down, I think, on the job recently. So every newspaper and TV channel in America is hyping the idea that Russia hacked our election. And yet the majority of state election officials have testified recently that they heard nothing from the Obama administration about this so-called Russia threat. I haven't read anything about that in the New York Times. That seems like a big story. If this was going on, if our democracy was being subverted by the Russians, why wouldn't the Obama people tell state election officials about it before a presidential election? It doesn't make any sense.
And the funny thing is, there were people in the media that were writing about this last year, as early as April, who saw, you know, signs of Russian troll propaganda operations on social media, who saw signs of, Russia influence operations throughout the election cycle, starting in the spring, going all the way through the summer into the fall. And yet, you know, nothing from the Obama administration, didn't want to acknowledge it, didn't want to politicize the facts that were already out there in some degree. We knew that Russia was trying to influence the election and may have even tried to hack into the election. But again, the motivation here for the Obama administration is what has always been the motivation for the Obama administration, and that is domestic politics. They thought it would hurt Hillary and help Trump if they actually gave credence to what Trump had been saying on the campaign trail, which is, hey, this is rigged. This is a rigged system. Now, obviously, Trump overstates a lot, but he was right about the DNC favoring Hillary Clinton, and, you know, we all saw what the email said. So I think this is a really clear case of the White House and the Attorney General's office politicizing this entire issue.
The net effect is you just wind up believing nobody in any context, and that's the casualty in the end. John, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, North Korea's missile tests grab headlines all the time, but a nuclear bomb leveling Seattle might not, believe it or not, be the greatest danger we face from North Korea. Up next, we'll talk to an engineer who says that country could devastate the entire country with something called an EMP attack. We'll explain that. Also, now that he narrowly avoided going to prison, Bill Cosby has a new plan. He wants to go on a speaking tour about, brace yourselves, sexual assault. Is that the day's weirdest story? There's competition. Top that just ahead. That's a clip from Revolution on NBC. It's a show where modern society is obliterated overnight thanks to an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. It's not just the stuff of television, potentially, though. North Korea just yesterday tested a rocket engine that American officials say could be intended for use in an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. Meanwhile, America's own missile defense system failed to shoot down a test rocket that was flying over the Pacific Ocean. John Moore is an electrical engineer. He says the Korean missile could hit the U.S. with an apocalyptic EMP attack. Mr. Moore joins us tonight to explain how that might happen and what it might mean. Mr. Moore, thanks for coming on. You hear things about EMP. Explain it for us, if you could, just in English. What is this? What would it do? How does it work?
It happens when somebody sets off a nuclear explosion above the atmosphere, and this destroys or disrupts the electrical power grid, computers, communications, basically takes civilization back to the 1800s.
So it disables anything electronic. Are we sure this could happen? I mean, it's never happened.
We're sure it could happen. We're sure it could happen. It probably wouldn't disable everything, but it would disable enough in our highly connected, just-in-time, efficient technological civilization to cause chaos that could cause tens of millions of Americans to die before it's sorted out.
Tens of millions?
Tens of millions. Because if you have no electric power for 6 months to a year, you have no food delivery, you have no gasoline, you have no water. You think about that, it's pretty bad.
And so you're saying tens of millions could die without being killed by the explosion itself, just because
That's right, the explosion
of living in an electricity-free society?
Yes, exactly. The explosion wouldn't hurt anybody, but the results of this would destroy systems that we depend on. We don't have much food stockpiled. We don't have water stockpiled at all for most people. It comes out of pipes. Air conditioning,
right.
Heating, you can see the problem.
Well, that's a horrifying possibility. How are we protecting against that happening?
We're not. There's been a commission that the Congress authorized starting in 2001. They've been writing reports on it. The electrical industry has been studying some ways to harden systems, but we're really not protected, and nobody's done an experiment. The last time this kind of EMP happened was in 1961 when the U.S. and the Russians tested the effect.
But why wouldn't this be at the very top of the priority list if the effects are that overwhelming and terrible?
Well, that's one reason I wrote my PJ Media article, is because everybody's worried about nuking San Francisco. Is North Korea doing that? This is far more terrible, maybe not quite as dramatic and a lot more science fiction-like, but part of it is the military has focused on this for a long time, but it was in the context of nuclear war where losing the electrical grid and so on was kind of the least of our problems.
So why would it take a year if the grid were disabled to get it back online?
If it destroyed the custom many hundred-ton EHV transformers on the system, we don't have nearly enough spares. They're custom-made. It takes a long time to build them. It takes a long time to deliver them. There's also the control systems that would go out. Nuclear power plants could melt down because of damage to their control systems. It could take a very long time to restore even a semblance of what we're used to.
I'm going to try not to order a year's worth of freeze-dried food on my phone in the commercial break, John, but I may not be able to control myself because you've just rattled me. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Well, Seattle slapped a big tax on law-abiding gun owners, promising it would curb gun violence in the city. That was 2 years ago. Did it work? We've got the numbers. They're amazing. An anti-gun activist who supports the tax joins us next. The City Council of Seattle passed what it called a gun violence tax. The tax imposed a $25 levy on every gun purchased in the city, along with a 5-cent tax on every individual round of ammunition. It worked in one way. A lot of gun sellers have fled the city for the suburbs. People lost their jobs. Did it work? In the intended way. It was designed to make Seattle safer. That didn't happen. Shootings are up significantly this year. Murders have doubled. Will the city reconsider its tax? Joining us tonight is Mark Glaze. He's a gun control activist and a former executive director of Everytown for Gun Safety. He joins us tonight. So, Mark, the point was to make Seattle a safer town, but the murder rate doubled. So isn't this a demonstrable failure?
Well, in point of fact, I think the reason that they passed this gun tax was to try and raise some money so that they could study gun violence, which I think is a good thing to do. I don't think a $25 gun tax is the reason murders are up there. The reason murders are up there is that there are a couple of rival gangs who are killing each other with guns. So I hope the universities there use the research money to good purpose.
Well, actually, I'm not arguing that gun deaths are up because of the gun tax. I'm merely noting the obvious, which is the gun tax didn't make the city any safer. What's the point of any of this? Your organization, the studies you're calling for, gun control itself, if it doesn't make a city safer, that's the whole point, right?
Well, look, in fairness to the folks in Seattle, I don't think they imposed a $25 gun tax thinking that that would be a silver bullet, no pun intended, that would stop gun violence in the city. What they, I think, were responding to is the fact that the gun lobby has made it impossible for the federal government to study gun violence. They basically banned the use of federal dollars for that purpose. So they were trying to raise some money to study things that might work, and I hope they use the money for that purpose.
Mark, come on now. Again, the whole point of all of this, the whole point of the studies is to reduce gun violence,
right? And
it doubled. And so it's hard to take you or people like you seriously if you don't let the data drive your conclusions. And the data here are really clear, crystal clear. This didn't work. So why would you still support it?
Yeah, look, all I'm saying is that nobody in Seattle thought that putting a $25 tax on the sale of guns was actually going to stop gun violence. What they thought it would do, and
yes, they did. They said it would make it a safer city. That's not true. That's what they said. They said it would make it. They didn't say it would end all gun violence, but they said it will make it a safer city. And the city got more dangerous. And so why are we the only show calling BS on these people who, by the way, won't return anyone's calls? They wouldn't return Fox's calls. They don't want to be held accountable for their dumbness and the fact that their idea didn't work. But, like, why not go back and compare the claims to the results? We're doing that. And, look, it's a failure. So let's try something else, no?
Well, look, I think they should have returned your calls. I really like being on your show. I think they would have enjoyed it. Look, if the gun tax doesn't work, and I think we ought to give it a little bit of time and let things play out and hope that this gang violence subsides, then let's not do the gun tax. Let's look at other things that we actually know the public wants and that are effective. For example, in gun violence, most often, the guns that gang members use are semi-automatics with high-capacity magazines, which, by the way, is the same gun that was used to almost assassinate Steve Scalise. Get rid of those. Why don't we try that in Seattle?
But that's just your numbers are wrong, actually. A relatively small percentage of murders in this country are committed with rifles of any kind. They're almost all committed with handguns, the murders committed by firearms. So actually, these guns may look scary, and I know they spin you guys into a frenzy because they're terrifying looking, but they don't actually drive the problem. So again, you're wrong.
No, you're totally right about that. What I was saying is that
I know I am.
You always are. Gang violence very often involves those guns. That's what they're using in Seattle. That's what the Scalise shooter used. But you're absolutely right. They're not the biggest part of the problem. The biggest part of the problem is handguns, and we actually know one of the things we could do to reduce gun violence from handguns, which is to impose a universal background check system where everybody who buys a gun, no matter where, can pass a criminal background check. We know that that would save a lot of lives, but the gun lobby stops us from doing it.
We don't know that. We don't know that any more than we know that the Seattle gun tax would reduce violence in Seattle. Like, this is all made. Here's the truth. There are about as many firearms in America as there are people, right around 300 million.
Right.
And as long as there are that many firearms, they're going to be the attendant problems. And also the upsides. I own a lot of firearms. I like firearms. But there are downsides, too. So the only way you can control gun violence with gun control is to confiscate all guns. And that's probably what you'd like to do. So why not be the one guy in your business honest enough to say that?
Let me put it this way. My dad was a gun dealer. I grew up shooting guns, probably just like you. And I'm actually, in theory, open to the idea that we ought to be able to have...
Your dad was a gun dealer?
He was. He was, and he actually believes...
Teaching Dr. Freud. What does he think of the fact you're a gun control guy?
Well, he likes it because he believes what I'm about to say, which is, in theory, we ought to be able to have as many guns as we want in this country, but we basically run a pilot project on that proposition, and it has failed catastrophically, which means I think you're absolutely right. Unless we have dramatically fewer guns and we make them dramatically harder to get, it's impossible to craft laws that are going to stop all of the bad guys but let the good guys do what they want. I think we have to have buyback programs.
You also know that states with massive levels of gun ownership, Vermont, Wyoming, have relatively low gun death rates. Vermont's, I think, number 3rd lowest in the country. It's got the loosest gun laws. So there's no connection between the number of guns people have and the number of crimes they commit with those guns. That's just not true. And so you'd have to basically take guns away from people who don't want to give up their guns. What does that look like?
Well, 2 points about that. First of all, the states that have the weakest gun laws tend to have the highest rates of gun crime, though they may be lower in absolute numbers. But, you know, Matt Damon actually said something interesting.
That's not true.
It is true. When he was promoting his movie Born, and he got a little bit of flack about it, but less than I expected, he said, you know, I've been to Australia and people there are pretty happy. They have basically, not just after a mass shooting, they not only banned assault weapons, they actually had the government buy them back. And they have not had a mass shooting since. I happen to think we ought to start thinking about
That's not true. That's not true. They didn't buy them back. They confiscated them by force. You had no option. It wasn't voluntary.
No,
if you tried that in this country, you would have a civil war in about 10 minutes. So why not just, like, is that the plan?
No,
is to take people's guns by force? Just say so. I mean, just let us know what the plan is. I'd love to know.
Right. There's a lot of different things we ought to try, and we're not trying them. But we recently, an organization I work with called Guns Down did a poll, and they actually asked how many likely voters and how many gun owners would support a program where you were required to turn in your assault rifle to the government if the government would buy it back. It had over 65% support, including among gun owners.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that 35% would be pretty tough to crack. And I would be in that group, by the way. So good luck with that, Mark. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks. An inmate opens fire on 2 sheriff's deputies. That's bad enough. But now new information shows that suspect could still be in prison and would have been, except for bad government policy. Our investigation on this is next. Plus, pro-life doctors in Illinois are being ordered to provide information on abortions to their patients, whether they want to or not. We'll talk to an obstetrician who is fighting this law, this violation of conscience. Straight ahead. Well, 2 sheriff's deputies in Tennessee were wounded this week after an inmate shot them both in an attempt to escape. Michael Eugene Bell was in court this Monday to face kidnapping and domestic assault charges. While there, he grabbed the pistol of Deputy Wade Bassett and shot both him and Deputy Wendell Bowen as he fled. Bell later shot himself before police could reapprehend him. That's horrible enough, obviously, but now a TCT investigation finds that Bell should never have been free to commit the shooting in the first place. He should have been behind bars. Ed Henry has been on this all day, and he joins us now with more. Hey, Ed.
Tucker, good evening. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been reversing Obama-era crime policies by making the case in the last 8 years soft sentences led to more violent crime. He's been met with scorn by the left. Many liberals believe many of these charges are simply nonviolent drug offenses. But in this case in Tennessee, it suggests not so much. The now-deceased criminal who shot these 2 police officers was Michael Bell, as you noted. In 2003, he was arrested for conspiracy to manufacture and distribute meth. He was slapped with just over 18 years in prison. But in 2015, at the tail end of the Obama years, the drug sentences of 6,000 inmates were slashed to cut down on overcrowding in federal prisons and to be more fair to drug offenders, in part because of perceived racial disparities. Among those set free, yes, Michael Bell, a full 5 years early. Fast forward to earlier this month. Bell gets arrested again. Look at the rap sheet: kidnapping, possession of a controlled substance, domestic assault, multiple counts of reckless endangerment by a motor vehicle, and multiple counts of evading arrest. After a hearing in the case, Bell stole the gun of a courthouse deputy, shot 2 deputies who were wounded, but thankfully survived. Bell, as you noted, shot and killed himself. Now, this is just one criminal, to be sure, but it makes you wonder how many of the other 6,000 people released early could return to crime, Tucker.
So, Ed, how exactly did this guy get out?
Well, to be clear with the facts is that October 2015, the U.S. Sentencing Commission, a bipartisan independent agency that was not part of the Obama administration, so this was not the Obama White House, let out these 6,000 inmates. It happened at a time, though, when then-President Obama was separately granting clemency to dozens of other drug offenders who were described as nonviolent. Here's an interesting twist. When the U.S. Sentencing Commission made their decision, it was Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates who assured the public it'd be fine. Yes. That's Sally Yates, who was more recently fired by President Trump after warning the White House about Michael Flynn's ties to Russia. In late 2015, after the release of all those inmates, Yates put out a statement saying, in part, quote, under the Commission's directive, federal judges are required to carefully consider public safety in deciding whether to reduce an inmate's sentence. That clearly did not work out in the case of Michael Bell. And remember, former Attorney General Eric Holder wrote a 2013 memo that sought to cut down on the number of drug offenses that would trigger mandatory minimum sentences. Last month, the Attorney General Sessions rescinded that memo and issued new guidelines to prosecutors that defendants should be charged with the most serious, provable charges possible. We'll see if that cleans it up. Tucker?
Thanks for getting to the bottom of that, Ed. There's so much going on, I think. It's just impossible to keep track. And I know you spent a while untangling this, and it's fascinating. I appreciate it.
Good to be on with you.
Well, are you a physician? If you are, do you think your job is to help treat people instead of killing them? Well, if you live in Illinois, tough luck. You're not wanted there. Last year, that state passed a law that requires all doctors, pharmacists, and pregnancy centers to assist pregnant women in getting abortions, even if they are morally opposed to killing. Dr. Robert Lawler is an obstetrician. He opposes abortion. He's fighting this new law, and he joins us now. So, Doctor, I just want to make sure that we're not mischaracterizing this. You're a pro-life physician. Obviously, you think abortion is the taking of a life. You're morally opposed to it. You are now required by the state of Illinois to facilitate it or to recommend a place to get one, if asked?
That's correct, Tucker. In fact, we're supposed to counsel the patient on the purported benefits of abortion, which, of course, there are none. And then, if asked, to provide a referral for an abortion and also provide a list of nearby abortion facilities where the vulnerable woman could procure the abortion. A clear violation of our conscious rights. It's truly.
So what if you? I mean,
egregious.
obviously, someone who is sincerely pro-life, just would not do that or wouldn't want to do it for sure. What if you don't do it? What if you disobey?
Well, there can be sanctions and penalties, and I suppose eventually removal of your medical license. I guess that's where this is heading, isn't it? Down the road. And that's the concern, and that's why we are filing suit against Governor Rauner in the state of Illinois with the fine attorneys at the Thomas More Society to really stop this egregious attempt, an end around, if you will, of the existing conscience laws that exist on the federal and the state books. I mean, as you recall, I'm an obstetrician, so by the very nature, I have two patients. I have a mother and a baby. And it's ludicrous to think that I could refer my patients off, one to be executed and the other to be mortally wounded for the rest of her life with a sense of regret. So we're trying to do the exact opposite. We're trying to offer an alternative to that terrible decision. Over the last 24 years, Tucker, I've had the...
I'm sorry, Doctor, go on.
Go ahead. I was going to say, over the last 24 years, I've had the opportunity to deliver thousands of babies, take care of thousands of mothers, counsel many hundred mothers who were contemplating abortion, and take care of mothers who are post-abortive. I've also been involved with taking care of the complications in the emergency room of the abortion procedure. And I can tell you they're horrific stories. So I cannot and will not comply with this law that is a complete affront to my conscious beliefs, my firmly held religious beliefs that life is sacred. And my oath
and also
as a physician
do no harm.
Right, my oath as a physician to do no harm. I became a physician to help people, not to harm them.
It's also, by the way, it exposes the entire pro-life bumper sticker as a lie, that abortion should be between a woman and her physician. Here you have politicians getting directly into medical practice and telling you as a physician what you're allowed to say to a woman in your office, which is like exactly what they say they're against, by the way.
Absolutely. They're trying to silence.
We're out of time, and I hope those police hope they're not coming for you for your civil disobedience, which I applaud vehemently. Good for you, Doctor. Thanks for joining us tonight and explaining what's going on in your state. Boys and girls like different toys, everybody knows that. So why is Hasbro suddenly claiming G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, and other obviously pink or blue toys are, in fact, gender neutral. You're going to have to wait for Top That to find out. That's next. Well, doing a daily TV show in the middle of a cultural revolution like this one makes it hard to pick the weirdest news story of the day every day, so we bring in an expert panel to do it for us in our segment Top That tonight. Katie Freight's managing editor at Olympic Media, and Trish Regan, host of the Intelligence Report. Trish Regan on Fox Business. And they both join us. Trish, you are first. Blow our minds.
All right, I got a good one here, Tucker. So you know the toy company Hasbro. They make things like G.I. Joe toys, My Little Pony. Well, the CEO has come out now and said, you know what? We are not going to recognize gender anymore. We have just, managed to delete this because we have risen above the gender issues, and we no longer recognize it in our toys. So, for example, when they print out their revenues, they don't have to say, well, this came from the boys section, this came from the girls section. When you as a consumer go shopping, you don't necessarily look for a boy's toy or a girl's toy anymore. You just look for a toy. So, my thought on this is a person, a company that is somehow trying to re-engineer human nature. Because the reality is, Tucker, and I got 2 little girls and 1 little boy. My little girls, they gravitate to My Little Pony more than G.I. Joe. And I would say for the most part, and there are toys that, there are toys that, maybe a chemistry set that boys and girls both play with. But typically, the overall marketplace, you do have girls' toys and you do have boys' toys. And for you to try and re-engineer that and somehow think that, the boys should play with the pink sequins and the girls, shouldn't like that, is going a little too far. So I'm just saying this is a man who probably needs to focus on his business more than re-engineering human nature.
It used to be a proud Rhode Island company. I don't know. That's a great point, and that is bizarre. Katie, can you top that?
Well, Tucker, I just have to say your seat in D.C. is pretty comfortable, so I don't think I'm going to leave. But you may notice that America's dad, after the mistrial in his sexual assault case, is ready to get right back to it. Comedian Bill Cosby, who has been accused by over 50 women of various sexual misconduct, is going to host a series of town halls on telling people how not to get accused of sexual assault. Now, kind of like if O.J. Simpson held seminars on the virtues of marriage counseling, a lot of people are really, really unhappy that Cosby is doing this. It's going to be in a minimum of 5 states. It's free, and it's starting in July. So if you want to hear it from the man himself on how to avoid sexual assault allegations, go find Bill Cosby.
It really is the Donner Party goes vegan. It's just too much. You win. It's too much. Trish, I have to say that My Little Pony was awesome. Thank you both very much. That was great.
Thanks, Tucker.
Good to see you. It was just 10 years ago, and liberals were admitting the country needed to curtail illegal immigration. Now, the same people acting a secure border is fascism. What happened? We'll tell you after the break. Here's a preview.
Well, I just heard today for the first time that Obama knew about Russia a long time before the election, and he did nothing about it. But nobody wants to talk about that. That the CIA gave him information on Russia a long time before they even, before the election. And I hardly see it. It's an amazing thing to me, In other words, the question is, if he had the information, why didn't he do something about it? He should have done something about it. But you don't read that. It's quite sad.
Catch our friend Pete Hegseth's all-new interview with the president on Fox & Friends, Sunday morning, 6 a.m. Well, things are changing so fast in this country that it's nice to have people around who remember what things were like the day before yesterday. Peter Beinart is one of those. Beinart is a lifelong liberal, but he's honest and principled, and he has an excellent memory. He's got a new piece in The Atlantic reminding Democrats that they were not always advocates for illegal immigration. Just 10 years ago, Beinart writes, liberals, quote, routinely asserted that low-skilled immigrants depressed the wages of low-skilled American workers and strained America's welfare state, because, of course, they do. Supply and demand is a law. It's not a theory. Economist Paul Krugman of the New York Times admitted as much, believe it or not, back in 2006. Quote, immigration reduces the wages of domestic workers who compete with immigrants, he wrote. We'll need to reduce the inflow of low-skilled immigrants. Krugman's column was not controversial at the time, in part because it's unassailably true, but also because at the time, the Democratic Party still cared about things like wages. It was the party of working Americans, people who know what the price of gas is. Now it's the party of the rich and the poor, housekeepers and their employers, people who take the bus or drive Teslas, and nobody in between. Maybe that's why normal people...
America first. America first.
America first.